With the start of my first word, my time will begin. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining the first Constructive Speech and Debate podcast. This is a podcast for everything speech and debate in Texas. Our names are Ryan Stokes and Kenny Adcock, and we are excited to continue this journey with you. As we go through the season, it is our goal to share some stories, introduce you to experts, and facilitate conversations that we hope will help you throughout your season. So, whether you're a coach, student, competitor, or parent, trying to figure out what crazy event your student participates in, welcome to the show. Today, we are addressing congressional debate. Congress is such a unique and fun event that students can really specialize in or use it as an introduction into other debate styles. So, with that being said, the first area we want to talk about is just what is congressional debate? Okay, and Kenny, why don't you start off with your interpretation of the event?
So my interpretation has always been that it allows our students the opportunity to mock and impersonate our state legislators or federal legislators. They essentially get a docket just like our Congress folks would in the federal and state sessions. They have debate, they have conversations, they end up casting ballots, decisions on whether or not to pass or not pass legislation. It's an incredible event. It allows our students, it's one of the most real world and applicable events that we have that we coach. It's probably one of my favorites to coach and participate in. It's probably my least favorite to judge. Because as students and as competitors, they get to get up, they get to move around, they get to ask questions. But as a judge, it's a 2.5 to 3 hour session where you just have to sit, watch, and pray that the debate doesn't go stale very quickly.
Yep, for sure. Now, in this event, when it comes to the TFA circuit and the UIL circuit, there's something that is, I feel like, unique versus the other types of debate that we do, because not only do you get to give speeches on the topics, but you actually have an opportunity to write the topics that you're going to debate, which is kind of a cool thing versus the other types of debate that we talk about on here. So, first of all, find out who's on your region committee, and for UIL, if you're a UIL only school, and really get to talking to them about when's the deadlines, and make sure you're checking the UIL site daily for all things Congress, and then go on there, find the template, write up some bills, talk to your students about writing up some bills, because getting them in is going to give you a huge advantage that we'll talk about later. And then when it comes to TFA, make sure you're doing the same thing with them, making sure that you're submitting your bills on time for a chance to get on the docket to debate all year. That's just a cool thing. Authorship speeches at TFA tournaments are a big deal. You got anything to say about writing legislation, Kenny?
So I think we'll touch on it here in a minute, but I think writing legislation is a competitive advantage, but it's also not a requirement to compete in the event, right? There's no rule or law that says if you don't write legislation that you won't get to compete in the event. There's just some competitive advantages that we'll talk about later on. I think bills can be really cool. They can be really silly. They can be really serious. I've seen some across the boards, right? We had one a couple of years ago that was about not, caging orcas or like an anti-SeaWorld bill. Then we've seen them as silly as, banning energy drinks. So I think that's the cool part about it is that legislation can cover anything from a serious topic to a not as serious topic. And so everything's kind of up for grabs and your students' ideas. This is where you can be really creative. I know you've had some fun with this over the years and some of the bills you've submitted. I can't speak to that a whole lot because in my almost 10-year career, I've actually never submitted legislation just because with all of the things that I've done in my school experience, it's just not been something I could take the time to do and coach my kids to do while being successful in the event as well.
Yeah, I gotcha. Another thing you need to know, coaches and students, is when you're writing legislation, make sure that it's going to be something that's approved by your school. If you're doing the UIL route, your principal has to sign off on whatever you put forward. So just be aware of that. Okay, with that being said, let's talk a little bit about the ins and outs of the event itself. Right, it's split into chambers most of the time when you have a large tournament, and you're going to have somewhere roughly between 12 and 20 students in a chamber. For UIL, for a optimal 3 hour round, you're going to have 20 kids in the chamber. Anything over that's going to add extra time to the round, and then starts to get ungodly long. So they try to balance out the rooms, and the separate chambers are adequate size and competitive. Something you need to know about speech times. Your speeches are going to be 3 minutes across the event. Okay, there's a little grace here and there, and just depending on how your PO's gaveling procedures are in the room, but you just want to shoot for that sweet spot of about 255. finishing up your speech, and then getting ready for questioning. Speaking of questioning, both TFA and UIL are now on a 30-second block, which is awesome. I actually prefer this over the popcorn questioning
That
style.
direct questioning has been such a blessing in Congress chambers because we can get deeper questions, we can get more offensive S type argumentation in the chamber. It's instead of this try to trap you or got you. Like people are getting more critical, and we see that critical thinking that people are really bragging about in the speech and debate community. I couldn't agree with you more that direct questioning block has been a blessing across both activities or both
Yeah.
entities.
And so just be aware, competitors and new coaches, that the first two speeches on a piece of legislation, so the first affirmative and the first negative, are going to have a 2-minute questioning block. So that's going to be usually 4 questioners. And then the rest of the speeches after that on the item are only going to be 1 minute. So you want to make sure your kids are getting up and getting those questions in because it really plays to the room. The last section we really want to talk about is the PO. And this is the student that runs the room. The PO is short for presiding officer. Um, Kenny, you want to talk about some the better presiding officers you've seen and like how they like do gaveling procedures?
So I think there are some really small things that differentiate a strong PO and a good PO. One is they have clean gaveling procedures and they know their procedures, right? There is no concrete procedure. There are some preferred methods, but there's some interpretation here. Typically, what I've seen is a PO will run through these at the start of their chamber, especially in the PO election process, which I think is important to add that if you have multiple people running for the presiding officer candidate, they need to have a minute to 2 minute presentation prepared as to why they should be the PO. I think that's something that we tend to forget about, but you have to convince the audience or the chamber to vote on your behalf and become that PO candidate. Gaveling procedures typically they'll gavel at 1 minute, 2 gavels at 2 minutes, 3 gavels at 3 minutes. Some people do it in the reverse, right? Or some people just get to the 2 minute and 30 seconds and then they'll gavel you. There are different procedures, and I think this is important for you to kind of decide how you want to acknowledge that you're going to acknowledge the chamber. But what's important is that you develop effective procedures, whether you do the 1 minute, the 2 minute, the 3 minute, and then the 10 seconds counting down. One thing that I've seen set incredible POs apart is that they have a tendency to stand up, acknowledge the speaker, and thank them for the presentation or the speech that was given on either side. Those acknowledgement points, I think, really set somebody apart and keep an organized and structured chamber. Tracking precedents is one of the hardest things in the world to do. I think it's one of the things that I'm more thankful for at the state level, that they do a preset precedence chart. So it makes it a little easier to start the chamber rather than track it from the beginning with, whack-a-mole style as to who jumps up first and who do you see. There's a little bit more clean procedure that way. You do need to track precedents for questioning and speeches. That's a mistake I've made over the years in coaching my kids in PO-ship, is not tracking it for questioning as well as speeches throughout the chamber. And so there are lots of things that go into POing. I know that I'm probably missing a few. Is there any that you want to add?
Yeah, no, like have a binder if you're going to PO, and in that binder you should have all of the paper work that you're going to need. So you should have your precedence and recency charts. You should have your like voting record chart. You should have the chart of frequently used motions. But a really good PO is going to have that memorized on like how many votes is needed. Is it a 2/3? Or is it a simple majority? Um, and then just being really clean as you go through the chamber. So from the opening of it all the way through, like, can I get a second, encouraging people to actually be debating, like, and having just a personality in the room as a PO goes a really long way, because if you are both clean and you have a personality to you that's enjoyable, it's going to make you stand out in the room. Another piece of advice to my POers: you get credited for a speech for every hour that you PO, right? So once you hit that 1 hour mark, remind your judges, hey, judge, I've been POing now for a solid hour. And if you think I've done an excellent job, you should go ahead and record that as a speech for me on your ballot and consider that when weighing at the end of the round, and then do that again at the 2 hour mark. And if it is a 3 hour chamber, maybe you're able to slip that in at the end at the 3 hour mark. But just remember, you are a speaker in the room, and you should get credit for your um, your hard work as well.
Because we can both attest that we have seen POs manage the chamber well, and we've seen them make it a really long 3 hours.
Yeah. As a PO, if you get called out by the chamber for missing precedency and those kind of things, for me as a judge in the back of the room, you went from like that 3-4 where I automatically kind of start you out and you start falling down the chamber, because you really have one job, and that's to run a clean and efficient chamber. And if the chamber is running you as the PO, you're just not going to get my vote. So be assertive and know your stuff and get in there and rock it. Yeah, and that's all I got to say about POing. So let's actually talk about the speeches, Kenny. Like, so what separates an amazing Congress speech from an average one for you?
So I think there are three types of speech that we have to address here, and that I hope we will. The first one, as we talked about in the advantageous element of writing legislation, is authorship. And so having those clean, clear arguments to begin, right, with these are reasons why we should vote in favor of the bill. Keeping a clean structure, like your hook/attention getter, your preview, utilizing those 3 minutes well, because no speaker should ever go under that 250 to 255 mark. If you do, I mean, that's probably not going to get ranked high in the speech rubric. That's probably a 2 to 3 at best for me. Just if you don't utilize a small window of speaking time. Developing well-sourced arguments, well-articulated positions. We've all seen in chambers where the speakers were reading to us rather than speaking to us. That drives me up a wall, right? Whenever you have a group of 20-ish teenagers and they do more speaking than reading, it's an incredible experience. You feel like you're seeing those deep critical thinking, you're seeing those deep analytical brains being flexed, and they really just show you that they've done the research, they know how to talk about this, they know why they want you to vote for or vote against the piece of legislation. Dealing with that structure, right, ending with a conclusion, a proper urge to vote, a couple of simple things. In my point development that I kind of work through, I teach my kids to analyze the bill, right? So we clearly have a clean conversation as to what the bill is talking about. Then we talk about like kind of the advocacy for solvency, right? What is the bill actually going to do if we vote in favor of it? And then typically my third point has always been, what's the consequence if we don't vote for this bill, right? What are we losing? And I take a solvency harms approach to kind of my speech structure in the way that I structure things, both pro and con. Giving a clean, urge to vote at the end, a great conclusion about, hey, this is the bill. This is what happens if we vote for it. This is what happens if you vote against today. And I hope you'll agree with me, using those persuasive appeals, allowing kids to get into that. And then I hope we'll dig into some of the other speeches as we continue to work through this. But those are some of the things that I look for and I really evaluate when I'm judging a chamber.
Gotcha. So what I teach my students is like the way your speech should break down is you should have your introduction, and that should be roughly 45 seconds. Because you want to give background on like the bill itself and like what it's trying to address, kind of like you would in an accept speech, like that background and talking about the significance of the bill and why it's being debated on the Congress floor as a way to set yourself apart, like significant statement wise, from like other people in the chamber. And then you're going to hop into your two body points, which should be about a minute, right? And at that point, you've hit 245. So if each one's a minute, you want to do, depending on where you're speaking on in the round, if you're early on, you might not have as much clash as you would if you're later on. But it's claim clash, right? So you're going to make a claim, and if you can, you're going to clash with other claims that have been made in the debate space in like that opening part of your point, right? So Representative A said this. That is wrong because da 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 da, right? Whatever my point's going to be. Or Representative B said this. That's a great point, and I want to extend on that point by bringing in some more information to bolster it, right? That's going to set you apart, even if you are in kind of like what some people would look as a rehash loop there, as long as you're adding in more information to the debate, you can still talk about the same point. Just make sure that your information is new and has some life to it. So once you do that claim clash part, you're going to warrant and cite the sources that you're finding from to pull this claim. Okay, and be precise about it. When did you find that? And what article or what study did it come from? Right, and compare that if you can. This really ties into that clash. They said it was a New York Post article. Well, I have evidence here from a Washington think tank, right? And let's really think about like the credibleness of the warrants in this round today. They're citing newspapers, and like the negation side over here has studies and think tanks and like solid sourcing behind our arguments. It's just another way to like bolster your research in in proof that you actually know your stuff in a Congress round versus someone who's been doing like the light periodical work. Um, then you want to impact it out to your voting base, right? Like we're Congress people, so let's talk about our constituents, right? And I think you kind of do that in your speeches as well. But I want that like claim clash warranted out, maybe some argumentation on the warrants, and then like impact it out to voters. Tell the people why passing or not passing this bill is good or bad for your make believe constituents, right? And if you can do that twice in each point, so you have like a 30-second claim clash, warrant impact, claim clash, warrant impact. You're going to have like four sources throughout your Congress speech, and it's just going to be a really solid speech. And then in the last 15 seconds or so, if you manage your time well, you can make that final call to action to join me, representatives, in affirming or passing this piece of legislation or failing this piece of legislation today. Right? If you can do that cleanly, you're going to be one heck of a Congress speaker. And that's what I've been working with my kids on. If you can do what I just talked about without a computer up there with you, you've just got your legal pad. As Kenny talked about a moment ago, you're going to stand out because other kids are going to have their computer up there. They might be reading from it. But if you're just speaking from your legal pad because you've got your speeches lined out and you've done the research and you know stuff about the bills, you're going to look like the top dog in that room to everyone. Like the kids are going to respect you. They're going to maybe not ask you as tough a questions because they know that you know the answer and they don't want to look dumb by asking a dumb question, right? Versus like if you went up there and kind of read your speech, the kids are going to go after you because they think you don't know what you're talking about. Make eye contact with other debaters. Like if I'm calling to claim clash to get somebody else in the room, guess who I'm walking towards and talking to? Um, them, right? Because ultimately the judge is watching you control that space. So speak as an authority figure and not as like a high school student. You should sound like a congressman or woman while giving your speeches, not like a high school debater. So avoid that debate jargon, like where it's like unique. Even if you're saying like a unique point here, a judge might be like, that sounds like uniqueness from CX, and I don't like that. So avoid like crossover terms with other debate styles when writing up your speeches. So Kenny, the last thing I want to hit on when we're talking about controlling a chamber is aggression versus confidence, and kind of how men and women seem to be perceived in Congress and how unfair it is sometimes to our female debaters to have to fight like the stereotype so much more than their male counterparts in a room. How do you coach this to your female debaters?
So, I mean, there's a fine line between ego and confidence. And there's a fine line between catty and professionalism. And so teaching our young female students that it's okay to be confident, but we unfortunately have a generation that will misconstrue that confidence as catty. And we just need to know how to like best read our judge, right? It's one of the things that I talk to my female debaters a lot is that perception of, okay, cool, we have a, you know, that we have this kind of judge, right? Like somebody who's been around UIL for a long time and has been in the ranks and is still a little bit in the old school way of thinking, and they want like female competitors to be a little bit more submissive. So we kind of know that we need to make sure that we're hyper aware of how aggressive. Like I have a wonderful young lady who's an incredibly powerful speaker, and she owns the space and she lives in it, and she is just an incredible student, and I love her to death. But sometimes her tenacity and her energy and what she provides to the space gets misconstrued, and often we have to deal with that and figure out how do we navigate that. And the sad part is sometimes you can't control other people's perceptions. That is an unfortunate, harsh reality. But I want to encourage our female competitors that, good, bad, or ugly, you be the dominant, you be the powerful, you be the voice, and you be loud, and you be proud, and you really step into that space, and you control what you're doing, and you be the, baddest girl in the room. You debate like a girl, right? As they said in 2019. The voice, like the perception is changing. We had Preston Stoll on 2 weeks ago, and we saw an all-female CX finals round. So the perception is changing. The community is growing, and the passion and the energizing we see behind female competitors is incredible. I want to support my female students, and I want to encourage them how to best navigate that. Our male students, you have a little bit easier role, right? Like you're not as docked for being a little bit more masculine, or being a little bit more controlling, or being a little bit more assertive. So unfortunately, that's kind of an unfortunate, like, sexist advantage, if you will, that comes about from that perspective. I often teach my male students to how to engage effectively, where that fine line between arrogance and ego and confidence is, and we try our best not to cross it, because we don't want to be perceived as we're mistreating people, but we also don't want to be perceived as that weak, can be pile drived, congressman. Because you hit the nail on the head. At the end of the day, we're role playing, and we are elected officials that have been elected by our fake constituents, and our fake constituents don't want fake, weak representatives. They want people who will speak up for their opinions and their beliefs and be passionate about that. And that's one of the things I talk to the kids about is you're speaking on behalf of a people group, and your job is to advocate for what you believe that they would want advocated. And I think this is something that people, in regions kind of miss out on, is knowing your political base in your region and how to talk to that group of people, because ultimately that's what Congress would have to do, right? Like if our elected officials know that we're, a highly conservative group, they probably should make a very, not conservative decision on the ballot. And so really making that political nature and that political notion inside the chamber is incredible. It shows a real world application. It shows real world feel for things. It shows that there's a deeper knowledge than just what's going on inside this docket. And it makes them look a little bit better as their role played Congress people. I do want to, again, I root for our young female competitors, but I also know there are circumstances and situations where they're just behind the eight ball.
Yeah. So what I tell mine is you never sound negative when you are speaking from a place of in-depth knowledge, right? And this goes for guys and women, right? Like in a Congress room. When you are talking from ignorance, you will often sound aggressive, petty, um, belligerent, right? But if you really know what you're talking about, it allows you to keep a more even keel in the room and to speak with power and authority on the topic, right? If I'm arguing with somebody about whether or not the sky is blue, right? And I could look at the sky and I know the sky is blue and they're claiming that it's bright orange, right? I don't need to get angry and mad, right? I can just really point to the fact that the sky is blue, to put it very simply. And so when I think about strong high school female students that are very knowledgeable, I've had a blessing of coaching several who aren't scared of anybody, right? Because they've done the work, they know what they're talking about, and they assume that air of confidence out of preparedness, and not an air of confidence that's kind of like a balloon where there's nothing in there and it's easy to pop. So my favorite Congress story is the the kid from Lindale, you know. Um, I'm not going to say her name, but she graduated back in probably 2018, 29, no, 2019, I think. I believe it might have been 2018, 2019.
It's one of those
But
two, but
yeah,
yeah,
right. We're in Region 7 Congress state qualifying tournament. And she was running the chamber. She was the best kid in there, and it was showed by her like being at day 2 Congress that year at state. And there's a kid who's fallen asleep in the middle of the round in the back of the room at Region, which kids don't fall asleep at a Congress round. I know it's tempting. It's cool. People are talking. There's a low buzz. Don't fall asleep because this might happen to you. You might have a unbelievably competitive, strong woman call you out in the middle of a round, right? Because the PO's trying to get a vote count and everyone has to vote. That's a rule of Congress. We can't move forward. You have to like at least abstain, like actually like raise your hand and abstain. And she goes, point of personal privilege to address the chamber. And she turns around and looks at the chamber and goes, if somebody would just wake Representative so and so up, we could actually get through this vote. Poor kid popped his head up and turned like 4 shades of red, but I mean, he kind of earned it, right? Like, don't fall asleep at a Congress round. And you know what? She went on to take first, right? And so don't be afraid to assert your knowledge and your authority, right? She knew what it took to get through that. She went through all the rules in a very calm, collected manner, and then with very much authority in her voice, told somebody to wake him up from his school. Um, right? It was the perfect balance of I'm in control of this room, I'm in control of myself, and somebody needs to take action, which feel free to do so. All right, Kitty. For a long time in Congress, POs were seen as a secondary competitor, right? They weren't given
yep.
credit for the job that they have in the round, which is making the round function like a real round. Because if there's no PO, the parley has to do it, and that's usually an adult, and we don't want to do that. It's not our time anymore. We had our time. We want the kids to compete now, so we need them to PO. How would you? How do you feel about the role of presiding officer and how it's grown over the last few years to the point of now actually getting its own like recognized state points, right?
Yeah,
In
I think it's
UIL?
really, I think it's incredible that the role of the PO has changed drastically over the last couple of years. As you point out, right, it's even worth 10 points as a state team. Right, you can pick up 10 points if your student wins top presiding officer. I want to give a big shout out to Riley Edens out of Sudan. She was the top presiding officer. I believe it was Riley Edens out of Sudan at the 2A classification. Because of that position, Sudan was able to upset me and knock me down to 4th place and walk away with an overall state team. Right, like, so those points matter, and there's a premium on prime presiding officer candidates. So I think there's an importance that UIL, that a lot of organizations are placing here, because now it's not just, okay, cool, we need somebody to manage the chamber who is willing to call out kids, and man, it's, we need somebody to manage this chamber, just as we need an effective classroom manager. Right, you can't be an effective teacher if you're not an effective classroom manager. You can't have an effective congressional chamber if you don't have an effective presiding officer candidate, because they, a lot of times they'll bobble the rules, they'll miss keep precedents, they'll judge the questioning block. They won't track those kinds of things, they won't give clean gaveling procedures, they won't shout out speech times, which is a little thing that I've seen people forget. They won't stand up and actively cut a speaker off because they're at 301, 307, 3010, 312, and they're just rambling on because they think that they can keep talking and that's going to gain them extra points in the judges' rights. And so an offensive PO who can end a speech and take us to the next session is an incredible feat. It's a competitive feature that I think a lot of people miss. A lot of adjudicators, I think they put a lot of like hindrance on the PO and they rank them lower because they don't speak as much. They don't give as many speeches in a round. But I think there is incredible merit to somebody who can effectively manage a Congress chamber, who can keep track of speeches, who can keep track of questioning, who can know all of the motions and have them all memorized and have all of those procedures and have clean gaveling procedures and keep a well managed chamber. Because if you don't, Congress gets sloppy. And then Congress starts to look like a Congress that we don't want, maybe we want effective speakers of the House in. Sorry, I kind of had to reach for that one. And so I think the PO is an incredible feature. I've had only a couple of kids in my teaching career that were brave enough to kind of shoot for it, because you have to have a confident kid that's willing to step into that role and be the limelight, right? Be the center of attention and really be, organized and structured and understand the rules and know how the game is played and do all of those things the right way, because it can be the difference between them qualifying to state and them going home. It really can. So that's kind of the issue that we're seeing with the PO. I think it's an incredibly hard and difficult task and ask of a high school student, but if you can do it and do it well, I think it can push you to state just by being in the chamber and managing it effectively.
Yeah, listen, like if you'd asked me 5 years ago where a PO starts in the room in my like initial ranking system, I would say six. I would have said six 5 years ago. So they're either going to stay in the medals or they're not, right? Like they're going to immediately fall out. I would say that's adjusted. Like now you start out third for me. Like
Kind of,
if you took the gavel, you're starting in third place, right? And you have the opportunity to move up or down from there. And if you're only making one small mistake in an hour, you're doing more than any other kid in the room,
yeah,
right?
100%.
And and so you're going to move up to number one for me. And like the biggest example of this, where I got like really changed my opinion of POing, was last year at Region when White House had a girl who is a decent PO. She's not the best I've ever seen, but
She's grown a
she
lot,
went
by
in
the way.
there,
She's grown a
huh?
lot, by the way.
Yeah. Like last year, I didn't see the PO as a threat. And like, it's not like me talking down about like her. I just did not like, it was a room full of like eight amazingly gifted speakers, right? And I just didn't see the PO playing as big of a role in my mind because you have eight incredibly gifted speakers that were going to be fighting tooth and nail for 2 to 3 speeches in that room, and everybody else was just going to have to get out of the way. Um,
Which
and
that
lo and
5A chamber
behold,
was ridiculous.
and and lo and behold, who comes out first? The PO. And I had the thought, that girl from White House went in there and just ran a chamber with eight kids that legitimately were fighting for the top 3 spots to state. Right? 5 kids deserved it. 5 kids didn't make it. Sorry, 6 kids didn't make it because she took a spot as the PO, but she ran that room, right? And she only got called out, I think, once per hour. It's incredible. And so the more I thought about it, after I got over the initial shock of not getting a kid out, I was like, she earned that spot. She really did. She just PO'd the hardest chamber at this region. Like, and I would say that to the 4A people down there. I would. Um, Last year's 5A chamber was unbelievable over in Region 7.
It was.
And
It was
then,
incredible. Y'all had some incredible students in there. I mean, from top to bottom, just the kids that were in that chamber were outstanding. And I think 2 out of the 3 made it today too at
yeah,
Super Congress.
yeah.
I mean,
Like it was a room full of unbelievable seniors that have been competing against each other for 3 years. Like,
I mean, and they
it
all
was,
loved Congress. Like there was not a single one of them that didn't enjoy and like were good representations of the activity.
Yep, that was rough. Oh man, it was rough. But yeah, so that like last year changed it for me. Like if I'm in like an unbelievably competitive room and the PO disappears, right? Like they're running so seamless. They're running that chamber so seamlessly. I don't even have to think about them. Oh, they're gonna get the one. They're gonna get the one or the two for me
And
because they are running that good of a room.
and I think you highlighted it right. They don't have to be perfect. Now, that's not saying that you shouldn't strive for perfection, but you're human and you're going to make a mistake or two along the way. And that doesn't kill you, but it does mean you have some ground to recover.
Yeah, right. Because, and I would encourage judges sitting in the back of the room who still have the bias of like, well, the PO is not a speaker. No, the PO is a speaker. They are speaking for 2.5 hours on and off, more than any other kid in the room will. Right. And so if they're speaking well and they're not making mistakes and they're not bundling over all the things they have to remember, they are equally as valid, if not more so, for taking on the challenge of corralling 20 other humans. Or if you're a teacher, you know what it's like to try to keep a debate room in order with 20 people in it. It's insane. So yeah, give some shout out and some respect to any kid that wants to try to PO. All right, Kenny, we're in the final rebuttal of this episode. Okay, let's talk about drills and resources for our coaches, and then get out of here. So, got any Congress drills?
I think one of the biggest tools that I utilize again, and I really I live by Flipgrid, right? Like I'm one man with a team of 26 with 17 hats that has to do 3,000 different things. If I can get a kid to record a speech and I can watch it at my house, that's an incredible tool. I want to shout out Cody Morris and Pocket Coach Academy again. He's been on before. Just released an incredible Congress basics, tips and tricks video. Highly encourage our listeners to go check that out. It's been an incredible resource. I've watched it a couple of times. I've learned something, and I've been doing this for 10 years almost.
Yeah, I mean he's only holding a gold medal from last year in the event. So
Yeah, I mean he's pretty solid. He hanging on to that triple crown was incredible. But the other thing is that we practice direct questioning. We practice chambers where we give speeches and we're critical and we're mean, right? Like hey, you didn't have this sourced. You didn't hit three. You didn't hit a minute, right? Like what were we doing? You've got to be kind of critical of these kids that it's an impromptu based event at times where you have that we train clash, right? So we kind of work through some of the clash claim drills that you talked about in your presentations. Even with something as we do simple topics and then we do our Congress bills. We make sure that we give fake names, or we'll often pick a Disney movie, right? And we start thinking about characters in that Disney movie. So Representative Hercules said this to Representative Hades, and Representative Hades said this to, Representative Philoctetes. We start kind of attaching those names to that representative in that center, and they start laughing a little bit about it, and they have a little bit of fun. And so then they start training that, name recognition attached to an argument, because that's a lot of times that's the difference for me in a chamber is cool. You didn't just get up and speak the same arguments over and over and over. You talked about how Representative Stokes said this, and there's a problem with that line of thinking, and this is why, and this is ultimately the problem. Or Representative Adcock said this, and this is why it's good. You really create that debate because people often forget that the full name is congressional debate. And so
mm-hmm.
we still want that, hard clash. And so training though, that is one of the best skills. And then you're going to think I'm really dumb, but I actually do seat drills. I train my kids to get up out of their chair in record time because I'll have them fold a piece of paper and I'll literally just sit there and I'm like, get up, up. And I mean, it's like running the mile on the track course because if they don't get up fast enough, they're not going to get called on. And so it's a really dumb drill, but I mean, they've got to be able to fly out of that seat because I mean, you've been at Region at SFA in those spinny chairs and how hard it is to get up out of those son of a guns, right? We've been in churches where the rooms were, 5x5s and the, person next to you was in your elbow and you had to like outmaneuver them, so we do seating drills, right? We sit down in our chair and we get up as quickly as we can. Because if not, the PO misses you and there's not preset precedence at Region. And so you get skipped on. Um,
Flashbacks to my basketball coach in high school not telling me I'm not fast enough.
And so those are a couple of the things that we do. Obviously we practice our speeches, we practice questioning. We do a lot of the little things. I have a, select group of kids that their sole job is to write speeches for us. So we have a collection of argumentation. I mean, it's a team effort. Congress is truly a team effort. Everybody can play a part. Anybody can write a speech on any given bill, whether your docket has 10 or 14 or 30. Splitting the research burden is an incredible asset that, a lot of people don't think about, but it's one of the best things that we can do. Sharing your stuff is complicated and messy, and it can get really gutsy with your team, but at the end of the day, having a speech compared to not having a speech is much better. Like I have a young student who does a crystallization speech better than most. He just listens to the class, he flows the Congress chamber really well, and puts everything together and talks about how the decision should come down to this or this, and this is what we're going to vote on. So sometimes those are good practices. um, the unfortunate part about Congress is there's not a lot of competitive opportunity before the region meet, so that's really unfortunate. So we try to get in as many of those chambers as possible.
Like on Tuesday nights at 5:30 via the UIL Springboard.
Yeah, I'm trying to get other people's region dockets involved. So if you want to jump in on those and want to do some Region 10 stuff, send your kids in, and I mean we'll have them bring their docket, and we'll either critique speeches, we'll give you some feedback, right? It's not just about competition, it's about getting you guys coaching help and assistance. And that's really been my mission with that project this semester. And I think it's gone well. It's been hard because it's not blowing up, but we've had good consistent numbers, and I really appreciate the people who are signing up. So thanks for joining me on Tuesdays. I appreciate that, friend.
Yep. All right. So on my side, just real quick, drills. Um, start with goofy topics with your debate one class. If you're lucky enough to have a debate one class. If you don't, start it with your like after school practice. Silly topics, right? Stuff they want to talk about. Make it like we're going to do Congress, but it's only things we would take to the school board about what we don't like about the school. Okay, right? Like we need better lunches. I don't like this little portion of the dress code. It needs to be changed. Nothing drastic, right? You tell them to keep it lighthearted. Like we don't need their little molehills that they're going to turn into mountains, but just something that they can heavily relate into. And then within a week, we are on to like the TFA docket, right? And I've got 10 freshmen, and they get to eat, sleep, and breathe that docket, right? And then so outside of class, they're doing research and writing up points. And when they're in class, we're actually running little rounds, right? We're going to get in 5 speeches before the end of class, right? Not hard. And then one of them's got to learn a PO. So, like, which one of you little kids is the bravest one today, right? Get up here. I'm gonna hold your hand through this as we do it. And you know what? This year, by week 3, those freshmen could go compete in any Congress round. Are they going to win? Probably not. But they're not going to just get ran over because they know what they're talking about when it comes to the bills, and they're fairly confident in their speaking ability. Shoot, I've got 3 girls right now actually that I would say on my team that are freshmen that I would be willing to take to any event. It's unfortunate because they're behind some seniors, but next year I'm gonna have some young, great Congress talent coming through Sunnyvale, and I'm really excited about that. Resources for coaches, like Kenny said, Pocket Coach Academy, and other coaches, right? Like reach out, ask for lesson plans, drills, right? At the end of the day, as coaches, we want to create the best kid, right? Like, and hopefully have them go represent our region at state and Congress. So, your kid needs help with structure on writing a bill. I'd rather have the kids go up there and give good structure because that gives my kids stuff to debate against, right? If if the room is half full of people that are just rambling during their speeches, that's not helping my students, right? So I want the debate world to be competitive. So reach out to other coaches, get their ask their advice, ask for help. The debate community is really nice. Oh, there's the timer. I feel like I went a little long on this one, but One, thanks for joining us for the first Constructive Speech and Debate podcast as we talked about Congress. Hopefully, we all get to day 2 together this year at the Capitol. Get to go compete in probably the coolest setting for any state tournament in all of Texas.
And if you don't, Kirby Lane Queso solves all things.
See you there.
Bye.